I'm Charlie Bright of Gold Derby, and today I'm joined by Pippa Ehrlich and James Reed, who are the directors of the Netflix original documentary My Octopus Teacher, which is currently up for the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. Um, Pippa, I'll put this question to you first, and James, you can add anything if you want to. This may be a very basic question to start off with, but how did you come in contact with Craig Foster and this incredible story of his?
So I was working as a marine conservation journalist at the time. And a mutual friend said to me, I know you're interested in free diving, and I've been having these incredible dives with this guy called Craig Foster. And we dive with no wetsuits, and you should come and check it out. And on that very first dive, my mind was just blown by how Craig was able to move around that environment and pick up signs that I would never have recognized, find animals that I didn't know existed, and interpret animal behavior in a way that I'd just never seen in real life before. And I'd been diving in the kelp forest for many, many years at that point. And about a year later, I approached Craig and said, I'd like to learn to track, and I'd like to learn to adapt my body to the cold, because I was very interested in that. And we started working together a little bit and diving together regularly. And about 6 months into that process, he asked if I'd like to help him make a film. And he'd been thinking about this project for a while. He wasn't sure what it would be, but he'd had this incredible experience with the octopus, and it had been permeating in his mind for quite some time. And he finally realized, okay, this is the story. And he sent me the treatment, and it just struck a deep, deep chord with me. And I started crying at my desk. And then once I started looking at the rushes and seeing this incredible footage of the octopus making a basket of kelp to protect her, or holding up an armory of shells to stave off sharks, the magical scene in the very shallow water where she's kind of dancing or playing with the fish, it just blew my mind. And as a kind of conservation journalist who was very focused on the marine world, I was amazed that here we had the entire life story of a single animal, pretty much, captured on film. And I just don't think that's ever been done in this way in the marine environment before. So there was no way I was going to say no, but of course at the time we had no funding. We were editing from Craig's attic. We didn't know if we'd ever be able to finish the film. And it took a long time of going through thousands and thousands of hours of footage and bringing it down to a very, very kind of compelling and cohesive central narrative. And as we progressed, various players came into the process, including our production partners Off the Fence, who are based in Amsterdam, and our executive producer, Ellen Windermith. And we reached a point where we had a cut that we were happy with, but something just wasn't quite working. And we had a feeling it was about the voice of the film, which at that point was a voiceover. And then that was when Ellen got in touch with James.
Seamlessly into my bit. So yeah, I was just minding my own business on another project in England, and a company I know but hadn't worked with before, Off the Fence. And Ellen, who I'd heard of but again didn't know, sort of emailed me out of the blue. And they'd seen some of the films I'd done before, and I think thought I could bring something else to this already great project, but that felt like it deserved to be considered in a new way at that stage. And I looked at the cut that they'd done, and like Pippa was just blown away. I mean, as a concept, like she says, to capture the entire sort of life story. Obviously there were gaps, but like this is an immense coverage of a single animal's life, and all the sort of ups and downs and learning experiences of that individual animal, and the intimate access that Craig clearly had, that was just illustrated in all the footage was just pretty mind-blowing stuff and completely unique as far as I was concerned. But as Pippa says, and the story was very, very good, but there was an issue with how the story was being told, or at least there were ways in which we felt it could be better. And that's when we decided that it was the right time for me to come on board and to interview Craig and to bring him in as a character in person into the film and to tell his own story in his own words. And that's when I had one Skype call with Craig to check that he was okay with this whole approach. And we got on well, but we didn't really talk much about the story because we kind of decided that we wanted, what I benefited from in that scenario was a completely sort of fresh and naive perspective. Actually, I didn't know the history, I didn't know the environment, didn't know Craig, I didn't even know a lot about Octopus. I just knew I was very, very curious about it. And we sort of thought that was worth maintaining and that we should go and do the interviews for the first time hearing that story out in South Africa. So I got on a plane, went and met Pippa and Craig for the first time. And then we sat at his kitchen table and he and I had a long conversation for about 3 days. And it was about the most interesting conversation I've had in my life. And we recorded all that. And it was amazing. You just never really know how that sort of story is going to be told, and you've no idea how emotional it could be, and it really, at the time, I mean, Pippa and I talked about it, at the time we felt emotional just listening to it. So we knew we'd sort of found the missing ingredient to the film, and then we went back to Bristol together and we recut the film around that conversation. And it really worked. It changed the dynamic completely because Craig and we suddenly had this new sort of interface to work with, which sort of, our initial worry was, is this going to distract from this incredible Octopus's life story that we're viewing it in it's so beautiful. But actually it just enhanced both their stories, and there were so many sort of similarities between them in a way, and his sort of behavior sort of completed his testimony and vice versa. So I got on late in the process and was very lucky to be invited on to such a fantastic project. But I think that we've all said all the way along, this was a true collaboration between a lot of different perspectives. And credit to Pippa and Craig with embracing a totally different and new perspective on it. I think that's what gives the flavor. That's what gives the film its unique flavor, I think.
So, Pippa, I'm going to go back to you because you had done some of the diving with Craig as well. One thing that I kept on wondering to myself was, how long was he able to hold his breath for underwater, because he didn't have any scuba tank or oxygen gear? And I kept on I kept on forgetting about it until like the parts where he said I had to go up for air. How long was he able to hold his breath for?
I'm just switching. So absolutely, what Craig's approach to diving, and because he goes in every single day, he needs to be as agile as possible, and he needs the minimal amount of gear. And of course, scuba bubbles are not very friendly for marine creatures like octopuses. So I think a long dive would be about 2 minutes. I think Craig's longest breath hold on land is about 6 minutes. But that's with a lot of training, and it's always much shorter when you're in the water. So what he was doing sometimes is he was filming as much as he could. Other times he was actually just leaving his camera on the bottom and capturing whatever he could remotely.
this James, I'll go to you on this one. What was the collaborative process with Craig like, since he was providing the footage but not serving as the writer or director of the documentary?
Well, it was very interesting, and that was sort of my first wondering when I sort of came to the project initially, because Craig is he's a very successful filmmaker as well, and he's probably the most experienced. Well, he and Ellen, most experienced people on the team. So you could imagine a scenario where him shifting and becoming the subject and sort of forgetting his natural instincts for filmmaking would have been quite hard. I mean, I think there are two ways in which we sort of the two reasons why that didn't become an issue, well, three actually. One, Craig is just a really good dude. So he's incredibly easy to work with. He's very collaborative. So any of the sort of stresses that some people might find about sort of, handing over the sort of creative reins were less of an issue for him. Also, because he's kind of had a long career himself. He'd also been out of the film industry. Well, he hadn't made a film for about 10 years. And that's a lot of, and we go into it in the film to a degree. He'd had some minor sort of mental health issues. He'd really felt burnt out and fed up with it. So he'd been removed from the industry in a conventional way for quite a long time. And he had genuinely approached his sort of experience underwater without any intention of making a film initially. Like Pippa says, when they came to meet, in hindsight, he sort of recognized the uniqueness of this experience and the fact that he had filmed this incredible thing. And I think at points during the journey, the filmmaker in him is realizing, I'm recording amazing animal behavior here, and this is incredible. But he was prioritizing his own sort of personal experience, and he was just documenting it and trying not to have any intent, and just wanted to record this animal's life because his interest had become a lot more to do with sort of escaping and getting what he can from understanding nature rather than turning it into films. And I think that, so he hadn't been treating it as a filmmaker. And so what we have is all that sort of footage that was unplanned, unscripted, as you can't do that stuff anyway. So we have this sort of properly sort of raw and authentic experience recorded on film. And then going into the interview process, again, I was a little bit, conscious of, do you want to interview this? I mean, I didn't know a lot about Craig at the time, and I'm thankful that I didn't really. After the interviews, I was kicking around his house, seeing all the films that he'd made, and starting to realize that, well, I'm quite pleased I didn't know that before we did this. So I deliberately sort of didn't really get involved in who he was other than this experience. And I had no real interest in it at the time. I was just very focused on this is in his personal life, he has encountered and had this relationship. And that's the deal here. This way you're not being treated like a filmmaker on this. And I think he found it genuinely liberating. I think that, he was not interested in getting back into sort of the stress and pressure of sort of deciding how to make a film. But he realized he'd had this valuable personal experience and really felt as sort of like, he really did feel like he wasn't thinking about that part of it and just treating it. He became the subject and was very comfortable with that. Sorry, go on, Pippa.
I mean, but he was, he's the subject. He's also the producer, so he was very involved creatively, right from the beginning as well. And he is just kind of a fountain of creativity. And in the beginning, when him and I were working,
if you think that misrepresented it, I think that there's a key part of where he obviously was heavily involved in that side. I think from my perspective, which was the most essential part, was that when we went through the sort of acquiring of his story and the shaping of that part of the story, he was not involved, and he was not prepared, and it was very important that he wasn't. And no, I mean, sorry, I didn't mean to imply he had no role in the film, but like, of course he had an enormous role, but the section which depended on him sort of shaking off and forgetting that process and just sort of telling us Craig, the human being, what happened to you during that year. He was very, very good at sort of liberating himself from that part of the process, and also for a really good portion of the edit afterwards as well, because he knew that he couldn't be objective about certain things, that he wanted to have outside judgment on himself and how that story was going to be told. And I think that maybe part of his filmmaking experience sort of guided him towards that as well, because you know that like you're not about to invite the subject of your film into the edit at key times when you're really trying to sort of like identify where their most powerful moments are. Like, you know, he can't enter that conversation in a particularly objective way, and he knew that. But then, you know, yes, there was like a huge period before and a huge period at the end where Craig is an active producer on the film, but he knew when not to be involved. I think that's the key.
And I'll send this next question. It's for both of you, but I'll go to Pippa first. As I said at the beginning, the film has been nominated for the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature. You just had a really big victory at the Producers Guild of America. What was it like finding out that this film that you were a part of got nominated for an Oscar?
This is a good story. So James and I had spoken briefly before, and we were like, you know, we're never going to get nominated. Like we haven't been singled out in the predictions. So we were pretty casual about it. And then what happened is we kind of made a arrangement to watch it together, but it ended up happening 20 minutes earlier than expected. And luckily a friend of mine was at home with me, and she just put the announcement on. And it all happened really quickly, and next thing I knew, they read out My Octopus Teacher, and I jumped about 2 meters in the air and started shouting, and then immediately called James, and he was mildly irritated because I called him in the middle of a meeting. And then then everyone was calling, and we were all on Zoom together, and I had Craig on WhatsApp on a cell phone joining the conversation. Yeah, it was a crazy afternoon.
It really was. Yeah. We truly didn't expect it. Like Pippa said, I mean, none of us had been in this position before. This is the first time we've been shortlisted. Don't really know, you know, you can't resist looking at the predictions on Hollywood Reporter and things and thinking, okay, we're not on the list, so it looks like we won't get nominated, but to be shortlisted was amazing. And, you know, we really felt like, what an achievement, you know, and this is kind of the end of the road. So yeah, it genuinely surprised us. And I did remember thinking, Pippa, what? Come on, leave me alone. I've got work to do. And then he was like, we've been nominated. And, so it was funny. It was it's been very, very special. Very special.
Well, Pippa and James, thank you so much for joining us. We wish you all the best in this upcoming what's left in awards season. And to all of our viewers, please like this video, smash that subscribe button, and don't forget to go to goldderby.com and use the Gold Derby app to make your predictions and see if you can outsmart the top prognosticators in Hollywood. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks very much.
Cheers.